Braxcast time once again. This is the 27th episode of this podcast. And while we are on the verge of greatness, there still is a good bit of stuff to talk about. I really want to be hyping up Horseman, but it hasn't come yet. It's coming really soon. Eric sees it to me directly, as well as the Rippaverse social media really said that Horseman is coming really soon, but we still have that great $5 sale that just ended yesterday, today, Saturday, and ended on Friday. Got that summer collection, you got Ripazine too, all that is done and is doing really well. So there's definitely a lot to be excited for, but I really want Horseman to come so I can hype that up, so I can get that in my hands because it's going to be a really great book. But while we're waiting for Horseman to come out, there's some questions of the day, and also there's some questions that Sheepsidian, the community manager, gave me as part of a community spotlight, and I figured I'd answer all these questions here, starting with this first one. Question of the day: do you prefer single issues, trade paperbacks, or omnibuses? So to explain this, or explain my answer, I want to have everyone be on the same page. I'm going to explain what single issues, trade paperbacks, and omnibuses are, and then I'll say which one is my favorite. So we're going to start with, I think the quintessential for comics is the single issue. So this is an issue of Spider-Man. I got this at a con, and it's also going to be one of the next questions. But this is the bread and butter of American comic books, or basically any comic book as far as I know. But in terms of American comics, it started out as being the single issues and newsstands being about 22 to 30 pages. They would have ads. Of course, they might have like clippings that you would mail in, and you might be entered in for a giveaway or get like a coupon or something like that. But this is the quintessential single issue, like I said, 22 to 30 issues, coming out usually every month. And this is the 350th issue, because Spider-Man started in the 60s, so you're doing like 30 months worth of for 30 years of months, 30 years worth of monthly issues. You get the 350 at that rate, right? So this is the single issue, and this is a good way to experience comics, right? This is the quintessential way. If you're an American comic purist, then anything other than the single issue is going to be blasphemy. But it does have its limitations. It can get expensive. It can be harder to track down back issues. The floppies, typically, they're also called floppies because this is bagged and boarded, but they'll typically flop around. That's why they're called floppies. Especially nowadays, the paper quality isn't really where it used to be, but it's just not always going to be the best to be able to track these down. They have, like I said, low paper quality. They usually have a lot of ads, especially in the modern day. You can have like a 22-page comic. It can have like 4 or 5 pages of ads. It can have double spread at page, double spread of ads. So you can have like the left and right page be an ad. It can be a bit jarring for the reading experience, but this is the bread and butter of comic books, are those single issues. Like I said, 22 to 30 pages. They're known as floppies. They got their start not just in the local comic book shops, but it's initially newsstands, pharmacies. You'd have them on a rack, and you'd pick, your Spider-Man comic, your Captain America comic, your, Superman comic, your Batman comic, or Detective Comics, and then it became Batman, right? But that's the single issue. I appreciate single issues. I like single issues, but what my favorite is the trade paperback. So this is Gooding the Polymyth, and this is a trade paperback. Basically being slightly longer than a floppy, usually around 50 pages or so is where you get into trade paperback territory. And instead of being stapled, you have an actual binding like a book has, and that's the main differentiation. And now, while this is its own single story, you'll have plenty of trade paperbacks, so collect issues. So you might have like a whole arc of Spider-Man be collected. So you could have 10 issues of Spider-Man be collected in a trade paperback. I have an amazing Spider-Man trade paperback, and I did not use it as this example. It's about this length, and it's got the same binding. So a trade paperback will collect multiple. They'll typically be in print long after those print runs for single issues. So they're less collectible, but they're easier to get into if you're getting into a series. And they're definitely something that newer readers gravitate towards. They're definitely something that even older readers will gravitate towards, because it's a lot easier to just pick up the trades after a run has ended than keeping up with all the individual issues. So I do love me trade paperbacks. I trade in trade paperbacks. That's what I said when I first started getting into comics, because I was buying a bunch of trades. I have all 25 trade paperbacks that make up Invincible. You have that nice collection there. But the next thing, the last thing, and I do like these, are called omnibuses. So you think of a single issue being the base for a comic. That's the smallest a comic book can be. And then you collect a bunch of single issue comics, floppies, and do a trade paperback. And then you collect a bunch of trade paperbacks into an omnibus. So this is the Common America omnibus. It collects volumes 1 through 4 of Common America. And you can see, this is a hardcover. So, they do all theirs in hardcovers, but this has got quite, quite the thickness here. So there's definitely a lot of stuff. It's got some weight, it's got some heft to it. And you've got basically all these stories, a lot of books, or, a lot of content. So that's really where omnibuses get their value, is that, you can pay $50, you can get like 300 to 600 pages worth of story, depending on how much, it covers. You can really get into some stuff. I think all of Invincible is in 3 compendiums. So you've got 25 trades collected across 3 compendiums. So that might be a little bit of a cheaper way to put it. The biggest thing with omnibus is if you're physically reading them, especially some of the bigger ones, they can be a bit unruly to hold and read. So like, having, this and like reading it in bed is a lot harder to do that. It's a lot harder to do that than reading a regular floppy or a trade. So that's really the big downside with omnibuses. And of course, they're not going to be nearly as collectible as single issues or even trades, in my mind, but they're a really great way to get a lot of content for one price and one book, have it all in one place. So I do like omnibuses, but like I said, the trade paperbacks, those are my favorite. And now that if you're newer to comics, what all they are, you can leave a comment below, say what you like. But like I said, trade paperbacks, I think that's where it's at. I think that's the greatest compromise between collectability and also being able to collect a large amount of content. And it's also, if you're telling longer form stories like the Rippaverse does, they do everything basically in trade paperbacks. They don't really have too many floppies. Of course, that's the format that the Rippazine is in, even though they have the same binding as a floppy. They're definitely longer, because the first Rippazine is about 80 pages, if I believe, and that's a lot longer than a single issue comic is going to be. Although you can have double issues as well, where you'll have 2 issues wrapped up into one, and those will typically, those can be 40 to 80 pages, but they'll have that same, staple binding, which a lot of people aren't fans of, because the cover doesn't really stay flat like it does with a book like this, because it's actually got that proper glue binding and string holding it all together, and that's all really, really nice. But we're moving on to the next question of the day, if I can get everything aligned here. So what is your favorite genre of storytelling in comic books? Now, for me personally, I love the universe aspect of comic books, having these long form stories with multiple characters tying into each other and building on each other. Invincible was more just a long form story that took place in a universe, rather than having like all these converging storylines. There was some stuff that alluded to it, but it was mostly following Mark Grayson's story, him becoming invincible, everything with his father Omni-Man, and of course everything with the Viltrumites and Planet Viltrum and all that stuff that got covered and developed across those 25 trades, 144 issues. There was some side stuff. There is a bit of an image verse, but it was mostly focused on the story of Invincible, because it was called Invincible. But what I really liked about Invincible was that long form storytelling. That's really what I love about the comic book medium, is that you can tell these stories and they unfold across dozens to hundreds of issues. And something with the Rippaverse is not only do you have dozens to hundreds of issues that we can have for these individual characters, we know that they'll converge onto each other, and that's what got people into Marvel and DC, was the fact that you had what the X-Men were doing was relevant to what Spider-Man was doing, what was relevant to what the Avengers were doing, and they would all converge and take place in the same timeline, and that would affect and build onto each other. And the same thing with like the Justice League. You would know stuff about the Justice League if you read about the Bat family, and if you read about Nightwing, you know what Robin was doing, all those sorts of things, right? Or you'd have at least some sort of awareness of that. So the fact that you have all of these characters that are interesting in their own right, taking place in the same universe, so they can build and meld their stories together and make something that's truly great and fantastic. And I think that's really what gets me into comics, and that's what's gotten a lot of people into comics. So I think this is a great question. I'm really glad they asked this one. But we've got the last question of the day. Have you ever been to a convention? If not, do you plan on attending one? So Rippaverse has attended quite a few cons. They did MegaCon in Orlando. That's where they announced the Horseman in February. They did Fan Expo Dallas, Fan Expo Denver, and now they're doing Space Con, which is in Texas. I believe it's coming up in October. So they're definitely getting into the con scene, having a con schedule, which is really nice. Conventions are really great for connecting with the fans, for getting special merchandise out there, and they're just really great social gathering and great events. Although I've gone to one con, I've gone to it twice, retro gaming convention, and I went there 2 weeks ago, and I didn't really talk to that many people. I was just there looking at everything. It was a retro gaming convention, so people were kind of like, if you go there with a group and you're going through all the games that they have there, but they had, like Dreamcasts and PlayStations, and even had like older computers. They had like Brother word processors, they had like Apple IIs and original Macintoshes and all that's really cool stuff to go through, because, this is retro gaming stuff. That was really what the theme of the con was. And you had vendors selling stuff, and I had a couple conversations, but I was really just looking at all the cool stuff that they had. It's always nice to see stuff like that. So I have been to cons. I would definitely want to go to more. I definitely want to go to some comic book cons. It's where I got, even though it wasn't a comic book convention, they were selling comic books, and I did get this one from that convention I went to. So you can always find cool and interesting stuff. And the last time I went to that con, I got a copy of Bait and Kados for the GameCube, which isn't the easiest game to find. I got it for a pretty decent price. So it's always nice to be able to go to cons and physically see stuff and talk to people, interact with people. Even though for someone as antisocial as I am, I'm not doing much of that interacting. But if you are even a little bit social, it's really easy to have conversations with people, especially if you're there for, a common hobby like comic books or video games or anime, depending on, how well the people meld together. But most cons I find, or I would like to think, is that the respectable people are acting in a way that's conducive to great social cohesion, right? And that's the whole point of having a con. And I think that's why a lot of these go so well, and it's why the Rippaverse cons have been really successful, or the cons that the Rippaverse they've gone to have been really successful for them. But with that, we're going on to not the question of the day, but Sheepsidian, like I said, asked me on Discord, it's like, hey, we're doing a community spotlight, and we've got some questions that we would like you to answer. Would you like to do that? And I said, yes, I am totally up for it. So I figured I'd make a whole segment of this podcast, Braxcast, dedicated to answering these questions, and I'll definitely clip this out so that way they can have it for the community spotlight. But we're getting into the first question. What interested you in wanting to start a podcast? So with the Braxcast, I was in on the Rippaverse before Isom 1 came out. And when Isom 1 came out, I really enjoyed that book. Of course, I liked Isom 2 as well. And then it was after Alpha Core had come out, and early in 24, after they announced Horseman, I was thinking that there was enough stuff out there, and the Rippaverse was definitely got enough of a presence in terms of the content being released that someone should do a podcast for. And I figured, I came up with the term Braxcast. I got a basic tripod and light and everything, and I've refined doing the video stuff before, but I came up with this format to record stuff, and I've made a bunch of videos. But most of what I do in terms of this video format is the Braxcast. So I basically figured out how to do that. I had what I wanted to talk about in terms of just covering the Rippaverse every week, every Saturday. That's what I do. And that's really what was the inspiration for me to start, is that I was a fan of the Rippaverse, and I was seeing that the Rippaverse was having enough stuff coming out that it would make sense to do a podcast about it every week. And so the general structure of this broad podcast is really that every Saturday I go through what was the news of the week. Of course, I do the questions of the day quite often, but of course, some weeks are going to be much more exciting than others. The week where the IRA campaign got announced, I had so much stuff to talk about. Other weeks are, slower weeks or stuff like that. So it depends on what's going on in terms of what they're covering on social media. But typically, I'll cover all the questions of the day, and I'll cover what's ever going on with not only just the Rippaverse's content in general, but the company as well. So like when Rippaverse came out and that was announced, I covered that as well. So it's really just going through whatever's flowing, cycling around the Rippaverse news schedule, and then just breaking that down and then covering that in the video format. And of course, when the website launched, I did some screen recording. I covered the website, but most of the time I do it, having this table here and then recording it physically in reality. That's typically the format that I've settled on. And then, of course, I always do that little intro where I go, like, I clap my hands or I do something like that to try and give a little bit of a nice intro there. So that's really where I have my format settled. There's a little introduction and then getting into the news that concerned the Rippaverse that week. Are there any other projects that I'm working on? So Velvet Room Publishing is my, brand that I publish all my content through. And if you follow me on Substack, you can find basically everything I do. I do a daily poll every day. I post that before 5 a.m. EST on weekdays, before 8 a.m. on weekends. That's typically how I get up. But typically in the morning, or I guess always the early morning, I do a daily poll, and that's really about anything. It started on the Eric D. July Mac app, or that forum, which became the Rippaverse member forum, but it's also on my Substack as well. So that's really the big thing I do in the Velvet Room with Joker the Fool. That's a podcast that I do twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then the first and third Friday of every month I do a paid episode. I have a paid Substack as well, where I do paid movie reviews. I've got some paid writings as well, and of course I've got other writings as well. So the novel Machine to Man, that's my, I don't want to say magnum opus, but it's the longest writing project that I have that's been completed. I published it in October of 2022 through Velvet Room Publishing, sold around 50 copies physically and through the internet. And it's a science fiction novel. You think of the typical AI rebels against its creator to destroy humanity. This AI rebels against its creator and saves humanity. That's my very basic log line for this book. It's a science fiction novel, although I consider it more in the realm of hard science fiction rather than science fantasy. I'm currently working on the prequel to this book. You can read the sample on my Substack. Again, my Substack is where I post everything. If you're interested in Velvet Room Publishing, I highly recommend following the Substack. And if you really like Velvet Room Publishing, consider becoming a paid subscriber, because that's how you support me doing more of my writing. And the second book with Velvet Room Publishing, I have announced this one, but I haven't released it yet. It's Debunking Gender Ideology and How to Manage Gender Dysphoria. That's my second long-form writing project. This one, I'm going to release it for free digitally when I feel that I'm ready to do so. Although I think this is mostly on point, but this is the second book, and like I said, the third book is the prequel to Machine to Man, and I've got a whole bunch of other writing stuff I want to. I just need to really push past my writer's block, and I think that's a big problem that a bunch of other writers have. And then the last thing, I don't think I mentioned it, was Hump Day Potpourri. So there's this, my co-host of Hump Day Potpourri is some, I would say, pushing middle-aged guy in Oregon, and we basically just talk about why we hate the government and why culture is important through a variety of news headlines that reaches out to mostly him, because he's the one who mostly brings the topics, and I basically give him my input, and then we just basically have about 35 to 50 minutes of just talking about all those various headlines, and that's released every Wednesday. So you've got my solo podcast in the Velvet Room with Joker the Fool, Braxcast, which you're watching now, and Hump Day Potpourri. All of those are available through Velvet Room Publishing. So broadcasting schedule, I think I did cover it, but the Braxcast releases every Saturday. In the Velvet Room with Joe with the Fool is Tuesdays and Thursdays for the free episodes, and then the paid episodes are the first and third Friday of every month. And then Hump Day Potpourri is every Wednesday, provided that we can both hash out that time to record, which most weeks that we do. So very simple. And with finding my podcast, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts. I upload Braxcast to YouTube. That's basically the only thing I'm uploading to YouTube in terms of podcasts. But if you want all the content that I make that is associated with me, my Substack is the thing to follow, because I will upload everything through there. You'll get it right into your inbox. You can download the Substack app and you can get it through there. So if you want everything that I do in one place, the Substack, I recommend it. But if you're just, for the Braxcast and you like YouTube, I upload it to YouTube. So, like I said, YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, Apple Podcast, Spotify, that's where the Braxcast is. But if you want to actually watch it, then YouTube, Rumble, or the Substack is definitely the place to be for that. And then what is my motivation for being great? So this is going to get philosophical, but I've been reading Meditations. I'm on book 7, just beginning book 7. And Marcus Aurelius talks about being in accordance with nature. And I do think that being great and striving towards human progress is what's in accordance with nature. So I think that is my underlying pursuit of greatness, of self-improvement. I have always told myself that you reap the benefits of self-improvement, regardless of how bad you feel about yourself, of how your day is going, how your life is going. Every time you make your own life better, you reap those benefits. So that's a big motivator. But one of the things with Velvet Room Publishing is I want to have a meaningful cultural impact that's positive, and that is part of my motivation for being great, at least in terms of making Velvet Room Publishing something that is great. So these are great questions. I really appreciate Sheepsidian giving them to me. Hopefully, this was a good, good answers to all of those. But with that, I really do not have anything left. The collections, the collections and the sales on the Rippaverse, they've really popped off. But I've really covered all the content for the content for those and what was going on in the previous episodes. So it was a bit of a slower week, but hopefully Horseman comes out by the end of this month, and we can really get into the brass tacks of the Horseman, because I really think that's going to be a big book, and it's going to be part of building up that hype towards Item 3. And then after Item 3, we're really going to get into the first event and really building out the Rippaverse, which is what I am here to do and cover on the Braxcast. So hopefully you guys enjoy this one, and hopefully if you're new here, you'll stick around. But with that, Joker is out. Thank you for tuning in to the Braxcast. Be sure to like, comment, follow, and subscribe to keep up with the Rippaverse.